What happens when an entitled guest thinks they can control a late-night talk show? Well, you're about to find out exactly how that plays out when someone decides they're above answering uncomfortable questions on live television. This is the story of how one interview went from awkward to explosive in a matter of minutes, and why the host had no choice but to do something unprecedented in late-night television history. If you want to see how this train wreck unfolds, make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments what you think went too far. The Late Show with Stephen Colbert was having what seemed like a routine evening. The audience was buzzing with anticipation as they settled into their seats, completely unaware that they were about to witness one of the most uncomfortable interviews in late-night television history. Stephen Colbert, known for his sharp wit and ability to navigate tricky conversations, was preparing for what his producers had assured him would be a straightforward interview about recent projects and public appearances. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Meghan Markle," Colbert announced with his trademark enthusiasm as the band played and the audience erupted in applause. She walked out with confidence, waving to the crowd with a smile that seemed genuine enough, settling into the guest chair with the kind of poise that comes from years of public appearances. "Thank you so much for having me, Stephen," she said, adjusting her position and crossing her legs with practiced elegance. "I'm excited to be here." "Well, we're thrilled to have you," Colbert replied, shuffling through his note cards. "You know, it's always fascinating to have someone on the show who's experienced such a unique journey, from actress to duchess to, well, whatever comes next." The comment was light enough, but there was something in her expression that shifted slightly, a tightening around the eyes that suggested she might not appreciate the casual tone. "Yes, well, life certainly takes unexpected turns," she responded with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "So let's talk about your recent projects," Colbert continued, seemingly oblivious to the subtle tension. "You've been involved in several charitable initiatives, and I understand there's been some controversy surrounding the funding and management of these organizations. Can you walk us through what actually happened there?" The question was direct but fair, the kind of inquiry any public figure should expect when sitting down for an interview. However, Meghan's reaction was immediate and telling. Her posture straightened, and her media-trained smile became more pronounced, the kind of expression that screams discomfort masked as confidence. "Stephen, I think there's been a lot of misinformation spread about these projects," she began, her voice taking on a slightly condescending tone. "And frankly, I'm not here to dignify baseless rumors with responses. I'd much rather focus on the positive impact we're making." Colbert, to his credit, didn't back down. "Well, I understand that, but these aren't exactly rumors. There have been documented reports from former employees and financial discrepancies that have been reported by credible news sources. Surely you can understand why people might have questions." "I can understand why people might have questions," she repeated, her tone becoming more clipped. "But I don't think this is the appropriate forum for discussing what are essentially internal business matters. I was under the impression we'd be talking about more uplifting topics." The audience began to sense the tension, and you could feel the energy in the room shift. Colbert glanced at his producer off stage, who gave him a subtle nod to continue pressing. This was, after all, exactly the kind of moment that makes for compelling television. "I appreciate that these might be uncomfortable topics," Colbert said, his voice remaining professional but firm. "But part of being a public figure is being willing to address these concerns. Your organization received significant donations from people who believed in your mission. Don't they deserve transparency?" "Stephen," she said, and there was now an unmistakable edge to her voice, "I think you're being quite unfair. These are complex situations that can't be reduced to simple sound bites on a comedy show. Perhaps we should move on to something more constructive." The word comedy show was delivered with just enough disdain to make it clear she didn't consider the platform worthy of serious discussion, despite having agreed to appear on it. Colbert's eyebrows raised slightly, a sure sign that he'd caught the insult. "Well, this comedy show has tackled serious issues for years," he replied, his tone still controlled but with an underlying firmness. "And our audience is intelligent enough to understand complex situations when they're explained clearly. So why don't you try explaining it to them?" She shifted uncomfortably in her chair, and for a moment, the carefully constructed media persona cracked slightly. "I don't think I should have to justify every decision I make to satisfy curiosity. Some things are simply private matters. But taking public donations makes them public matters," Colbert countered. "When people contribute their hard-earned money to causes they believe in, they have a right to know how those funds are being used." "Stephen, I'm going to stop you right there," she said, holding up her hand in a gesture that was both dismissive and condescending. "I didn't come here to be interrogated like I'm some kind of criminal. I came here to have a pleasant conversation about positive things happening in the world." The audience was now completely silent, sensing that something significant was unfolding. Colbert looked directly at her, and there was something in his expression that suggested he was making a decision about how far to push this. "I understand you might find these questions uncomfortable," he said carefully, "but they're legitimate questions that have been raised by multiple news outlets. As someone who's chosen to remain in the public eye and continue accepting public support, don't you think people deserve answers?" Her response was swift and revealing. "What I think is that there are certain boundaries that should be respected, and I'm not going to sit here and be ambushed with hostile questions that have nothing to do with why I agreed to appear on your show." The word hostile hung in the air like a challenge. Colbert's professional demeanor remained intact, but there was a subtle shift in his energy that suggested he was done being polite about her evasiveness. "I'm not sure I'd characterize asking about public accountability as hostile," he said, his voice calm but with an unmistakable edge. "But if you'd prefer not to discuss these issues, perhaps you could tell us what you did want to talk about when you agreed to come on the show." She looked genuinely surprised by the question, as if she'd expected to be able to control the entire conversation without any pushback. "I wanted to talk about the positive work we're doing, the people we're helping, the difference we're making in communities that need support." "That's great," Colbert replied, "and I'm sure our audience would love to hear about that. But part of understanding the positive impact is understanding how the organization operates, how decisions are made, and how resources are allocated. These aren't gotcha questions, they're basic accountability measures." The tension in the room was now palpable, and it was clear that this interview was heading toward uncharted territory. Her face flushed slightly, and she leaned forward in her chair with the kind of body language that suggested she was about to draw a line in the sand. "Stephen, I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about what this interview was supposed to be. I was told this would be a supportive platform to discuss meaningful work, not an interrogation." "I'm sorry you feel that way," Colbert responded, his voice steady. "But I think our audience deserves to hear from public figures who are willing to engage with legitimate questions about their work. That's not an interrogation, that's journalism." "Journalism?" she repeated, and there was no hiding the scorn in her voice now. "This is a late-night comedy show, Stephen. Let's not pretend this is some kind of serious news program. I've done interviews with real journalists, and they understand the difference between asking questions and being deliberately provocative." The insult was unmistakable, and you could see Colbert's jaw tighten slightly. The audience seemed to collectively hold its breath, sensing that something significant was about to happen. This wasn't the usual banter between host and guest. This was a genuine conflict playing out in real time. "I see," Colbert said, his tone remaining controlled but with an underlying steel. "So you're saying that because this is a comedy show, I shouldn't ask you about serious issues? That's an interesting perspective on media responsibility." "I'm saying that there's a time and place for everything," she replied, her voice rising slightly. "And ambushing someone with hostile questions about complex business matters on a comedy show is neither the time nor the place." "But you knew you were coming on a talk show," Colbert countered. "Did you think we were just going to talk about the weather? These are issues that have been in the news for months. Any competent media team would have prepared you for these questions." Her expression darkened at the implication that her team might be incompetent, and for a moment, the mask of composure slipped entirely. "My team is extremely competent, thank you very much. What they didn't prepare me for was this level of disrespect." "Disrespect?" Colbert repeated, his eyebrows rising. "I've been nothing but professional. I've asked you straightforward questions about matters of public interest. If you find that disrespectful, perhaps the issue isn't with my questions." She stood up abruptly, startling both the audience and Colbert himself. "I don't think I need to sit here and be lectured about public responsibility by someone who makes jokes for a living." The audience gasped audibly. She had just insulted not only Colbert, but the entire medium of late-night television, and everyone in the room understood the magnitude of what had just happened. Colbert remained seated, but his expression had shifted to something between amazement and cold professionalism. "I see," he said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "So, making jokes for a living disqualifies me from asking serious questions? That's a fascinating take on the role of media in society." Realizing she might have gone too far, she attempted to backtrack while remaining seated but leaning forward aggressively. "That's not what I meant, Stephen. I just think there are more appropriate venues for these kinds of discussions." Like where? Colbert asked, his tone sharp now. Because from what I understand, you've been declining interviews with traditional news outlets for months. So if not here, then where exactly should people go to get answers to these questions? She opened her mouth to respond, then seemed to think better of it, settling back into her chair with a look that suggested she was calculating her next move. I think you're mischaracterizing my media availability. Am I? Colbert asked, pulling out a piece of paper. Because I have a list here of interview requests that have gone unanswered from major news organizations. The New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, the BBC. Are you telling me these are all fabricated? Her composure cracked further, and she looked genuinely flustered for the first time. Those are private communications, and I don't appreciate you bringing them up on television. They're not private when they're matters of public record, Colbert replied. And the fact that you're avoiding accountability with serious news organizations but willing to appear on a comedy show suggests you thought this would be easier. That you could control the narrative without facing difficult questions. That's a completely unfair characterization, she snapped, her voice rising again. I came here in good faith, expecting to have a civilized conversation about important issues. Instead, I'm being attacked and humiliated on national television. You're being asked questions, Colbert corrected firmly. If you find questions about your public work humiliating, that says more about your work than it does about my questions. The audience was completely silent now, recognizing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't the usual back and forth of a talk show interview. This was a genuine confrontation between two strong personalities, and it was clear that neither was backing down. I think we need to take a commercial break, she said, looking directly at the cameras as if she could control the production herself. We don't take commercial breaks when I say we take commercial breaks, Colbert replied, his voice firm but not aggressive. This is my show, and we'll continue this conversation until it reaches a natural conclusion. Her eyes widened at his direct challenge to her attempt to control the situation. Excuse me? I think I have some say in when I need a moment to collect myself. You have the right to end the interview entirely if you choose, Colbert said calmly. But you don't get to dictate how my show operates. If you want to leave, you're free to do so. But if you stay, we're going to continue having this conversation. She looked genuinely shocked that he had called her bluff, and for several long seconds, she seemed to be weighing her options. The audience waited in tense silence, sensing that this moment would determine the direction of the entire interview. I'm not leaving, she said finally, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. But I want it on record that this is not what I agreed to when I accepted this invitation. What exactly did you agree to? Colbert asked, leaning forward slightly. Because my understanding is that you agreed to a standard talk show interview. Did someone promise you that you'd only be asked questions you approved of in advance? She hesitated, and in that hesitation, everyone in the room understood that she had indeed expected some level of editorial control over the conversation. I expected to be treated with basic courtesy and respect. And I believe I have been courteous and respectful, Colbert replied. I've asked you legitimate questions about your public work in a professional manner. The fact that you don't like the questions doesn't make them discourteous. The fact that you won't let me move on to topics I'm comfortable discussing shows a lack of basic interviewing skills. She shot back, her frustration now fully evident. The insult was direct and personal, and Colbert's expression hardened noticeably. I see. So your definition of good interviewing is letting the guest control the entire conversation and avoid any topic that might be uncomfortable. That's an interesting perspective on journalism. This isn't journalism, she repeated, her voice dripping with disdain. This is gotcha television designed to create controversy and boost ratings. If asking about financial transparency in charitable organizations is gotcha television, Colbert replied, his voice steady but with an edge of steel, then perhaps the problem isn't with television. The exchange hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down, and it was clear that both participants understood they had reached a point of no return. She stared at him with undisguised contempt, while he maintained his professional composure despite the obvious provocation. You know what, Stephen? She said, her voice taking on a tone of condescending patience. I think the real issue here is that you're simply not equipped to handle an interview of this caliber. You're used to softball questions with celebrities promoting movies, not serious conversations with people doing meaningful work in the world. The audience collectively drew breath at the audacity of the statement. She had just suggested that not only was Colbert professionally incompetent, but that her work was somehow more significant than anything he typically covered. Colbert's expression remained controlled, but there was a dangerous glint in his eyes. "I see," he said slowly. "So you're saying that my years of interviewing presidents, world leaders, Nobel Prize winners, and influential thinkers have somehow failed to prepare me for talking to you. That's a remarkable assessment of your own importance. I'm saying that some subjects require more nuance and sensitivity than others?" She replied, completely missing the sarcasm in his tone. "And clearly, this particular subject is beyond your skill set." "My skill set?" Colbert repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "Well, let me demonstrate my skill set by asking you one more time. Can you explain to the people who donated money to your organization why financial records show significant discrepancies between what was promised and what was delivered?" "I already told you I'm not going to dignify that line of questioning," she snapped. "And frankly, I'm starting to wonder if this entire interview was set up as some kind of ambush. Did someone put you up to this?" The paranoia in her voice was unmistakable, and it revealed just how disconnected she had become from reality. Colbert looked genuinely amazed by the suggestion. "Put me up to what?" he asked. "Doing my job? Asking questions that any journalist would ask? Nobody had to put me up to anything. These are basic questions about basic accountability." "Basic questions?" She laughed bitterly. "Stephen, there's nothing basic about what you're doing here. You're trying to destroy someone's reputation on national television, and you're doing it under the guise of journalism." "I'm trying to get answers to legitimate questions," Colbert replied firmly. "If those questions threaten your reputation, perhaps the issue isn't with the questions." She stood up again, this time more aggressively, and pointed directly at him. "You know what? I don't have to sit here and be attacked by someone who clearly has an agenda. This interview is over." "Actually," Colbert said, remaining seated but speaking with quiet authority, "the interview is over when I say it's over. This is my show, these are my cameras, and this is my audience. You're welcome to leave at any time, but you don't get to declare the interview over." The power dynamic in the room shifted palpably. She looked around as if suddenly realizing that she had no actual control over the situation, that her usual tactics of manipulation and intimidation weren't working in this environment. "Are you seriously going to try to hold me here against my will?" she asked, her voice rising to a near shriek. "Nobody's holding you anywhere," Colbert replied calmly. "I'm simply pointing out that you don't control this show. You can walk out that door anytime you want. But if you stay, we're going to continue this conversation." She looked toward the exit, then back at the cameras, clearly calculating the optics of either choice. Walking out would look like defeat, but staying meant continuing to face questions she couldn't or wouldn't answer. "This is harassment," she said finally, her voice taking on a victimized tone. "You're harassing me on national television because I won't participate in your gotcha journalism." "I'm asking you about your public work," Colbert replied, his patience clearly wearing thin. "If you consider that harassment, then perhaps you shouldn't be doing public work." "Don't you dare tell me what I should or shouldn't be doing," she exploded, her composure finally cracking completely. "You have no idea what I've been through, what I've sacrificed, what I've given up to try to make a difference in this world. And I'm not going to sit here and be lectured by someone who's never done anything but make jokes about other people's real work." The personal attack was so far beyond the bounds of professional discourse that even she seemed to realize she had gone too far. The audience was completely silent, stunned by the raw hostility they had just witnessed. Colbert stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried clearly throughout the studio. "You know what?" he said, looking directly at her. "I think you're right. This interview is over. Not because you've declared it over, but because you've made it clear that you're not capable of having a civil conversation about your public work." "Excuse me?" she said, her voice uncertain for the first time. "You heard me?" Colbert replied, his tone calm but final. "You've spent the last 20 minutes insulting me, insulting my show, insulting my audience, and insulting the very concept of media accountability. You've made it clear that you think you're above answering questions about how you spend other people's money, and you've been nothing but hostile and disrespectful from the moment I asked you to explain your actions." She stared at him in disbelief, as if she couldn't process what was happening. "Stephen, I think you're overreacting." "I'm not overreacting," he replied firmly. "I'm responding appropriately to someone who came on my show and treated everyone here with complete contempt. You want to know what real harassment looks like? It's coming on someone's show and spending the entire time telling them they're not good enough to interview you. That's not what I said, she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. That's exactly what you said, Colbert replied. Multiple times. You've made it clear that you think this show, this audience, and this host are beneath you. So I'm going to do something I've never done before in 20 years of television. The audience leaned forward, sensing that they were about to witness something unprecedented. Even the production crew seemed to be holding their breath. I'm asking you to leave, Colbert said clearly. Not because you won't answer my questions, but because of how you've chosen to conduct yourself while not answering them. You've been disrespectful, condescending, and hostile, and I'm not going to subject my audience to any more of your behavior. She looked genuinely shocked, as if the possibility of being asked to leave had never occurred to her. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious, Colbert replied. Security will escort you out if necessary, but I'd prefer if you just walked out with whatever dignity you have left. For a long moment, she just stood there, looking between Colbert, the audience, and the cameras, as if waiting for someone to tell her this was all a joke. When no one did, reality seemed to finally sink in. This is outrageous, she said, her voice shaking with anger. You're going to regret this, Stephen. People are going to see exactly what kind of person you really are. I'm counting on it, Colbert replied calmly, because what they're going to see is someone who expects guests to show basic respect for the people who invited them here. She opened her mouth as if to respond, then seemed to think better of it. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the exit, her movements stiff with barely contained rage. The audience watched in stunned silence as she disappeared through the backstage door. Colbert turned back to the cameras, his expression weary but resolute. Well, folks, that's something that's never happened before on this show. I want to apologize to all of you for having to witness that, but I think it's important that public figures understand that being in the public eye comes with certain responsibilities, including the responsibility to treat people with basic courtesy. He paused, looking directly into the camera. We'll be right back after these messages, and when we return, we'll try to end this show on a more positive note. As the cameras cut to commercial, the audience sat in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. It was clear that everyone in the room understood they had seen something unprecedented, something that would be talked about for years to come. The entitled behavior, the complete disrespect for the host and audience, the refusal to engage with legitimate questions, and finally the dramatic exit had created a perfect storm of television drama. But more than that, it had revealed the true character of someone who clearly believed the rules that applied to everyone else didn't apply to her. What did you think of this incredible display of entitlement? Have you ever seen a guest behave this badly on a talk show? Let me know in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more shocking stories from the world of entertainment. What other celebrity meltdowns do you think deserve this kind of breakdown?